The anti-aging industry is a $59 billion business built on creams, serums, injections, IV drips, and stem cell tourism to places that most people probably couldn't even spot on a map. Almost all of it is being sold from the outside in, where the actual aging is happening at the level of your DNA, your mitochondria, and the cellular pathways that decide whether your cells protect themselves or wear themselves down over time. Welcome to sammillerscience, where you're joining me nearly 2 decades into my personal journey to bridge the gap between macros, metabolism, muscle, and medicine. If you're joining me, thanks for trusting me to elevate your health and realize your true potential. Each week and inside every episode, I'll be sharing methods and models from my coaching journey and my personal experience, as well as the science that you need to achieve whatever specific goals you're working on in your life. Let's jump into today's show. By the time you can see it at the level of your skin, it's been happening underneath the surface for years. Aging is an inside-out process, but it's being treated as an outside-in problem. Today, I'm walking you through exactly what's happening at the biological level and why one of the leading theories says that it's almost nothing to do with the things that you've been sold, and what the research and evidence actually supports if you want a longer health span and the strength to actually be able to enjoy it. If you're new to my world, I spend a lot of time translating complex concepts like aging and longevity into things that clients and coaches can actually do something with it in real life. This topic is personal to me in a way that most topics aren't, and I want to share that with you guys before we dive into the science today. When you watch the people who raised you get failed by a reactive Western medical system, you stop being interested in aging as an abstract topic and you start asking better questions about what's actually happening inside the body over time and where the leverage points are. The rest of this episode is the version of that conversation that I wish I could have had 10 years earlier. This is the 80-20 breakdown on longevity that virtually no one talks about. A famous study out of Denmark looked at identical twins who are living different lifestyles. These are two people with the same genetic starting point, making different choices over several decades. The conclusion was that aging is roughly 20% determined by genetics, and the other 80% is lifestyle. Obviously, the percentages are a little arbitrary here, but I think you guys get the idea of the breakdown. The way that the literature describes this is that the genes load the gun and your environment pulls the trigger. That's one of the most popular phrases in genetics, and you've probably heard it. If you're walking around feeling like your family history sealed your fate, the data simply doesn't support that at this point. Your body carries a genetic blueprint, but the trajectory of how that blueprint expresses itself over time is largely yours to influence through your lifestyle, training, and nutrition. When it comes to aging, researchers have identified 9 different hallmarks. These include genomic instability, telomere attrition, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, and stem cell exhaustion. You don't need to memorize the list of the different proposed theories of aging, but what's interesting is that for a long time, the dominant explanation for why these hallmarks happen was known as the oxidative stress theory, the idea that free radical damage was the main engine of aging. That theory has been largely displaced as the central driver of aging, but oxidative stress still plays a role within the broader picture of these different hallmarks that we'll talk about today. The current leading framework is called the information theory of aging, and it's worth understanding because it impacts how you may want to live your life and what you're doing from a lifestyle perspective. Your DNA carries the instructions for every type of cell in your body. Every cell has the full set, but each cell only reads the instruction relative to its particular job. So think of a heart cell. What's relevant for a heart cell is going to be different than a liver cell. So a heart cell reads heart cell instructions. A liver cell reads liver cell instructions. The mechanism that gets decided which instructions get read in which cell is called epigenetics. As you age, the epigenetic marks that tell a heart cell to behave like a heart cell start to degrade. The cell loses its identity and starts making protein that it shouldn't, signals things that maybe it shouldn't, and eventually tips into what's called senescence, a state where the cell can't divide, but it won't necessarily just die, and it starts secreting inflammatory molecules into the surrounding tissues. The translation to transformation is important because aging at the cellular level is largely a loss of information. That's kind of the theory behind the information theory of aging. The epigenetic instructions degrade, and the consequences of that degradation compound over decades into everything we recognize as getting old, from fatigue and slower recovery to the chronic disease that arrives in your 50s when maybe you felt fine in your 30s. There are 3 pathways that you can actually move that sit at the controls of this aging process, and the research on these is some of the most replicated longevity work in the the field. So the first pathway is sirtuins. Sirtuin literally stands for silent information regulator. These are proteins that sit at the very top of your cellular control system, where their job is to keep your DNA packaged correctly, repair the damage when it happens, and turn on the right genes and then turn off the wrong ones. They run on a fuel source known as NAD, and as you age, your NAD levels decline, which means your sirtuins lose their power to protect the system. When sirtuins are active, they reduce chronic inflammation, protect mitochondria, and support DNA repair. In animal models, activating sirtuins improves endurance, memory, and metabolic flexibility. So all of these things being a great thing for our quality of life and our health. The second pathway is AMPK. AMPK gets activated when nutrient availability is low. It's the body's stress response pathway, but the kind of stress your body actually wants, the controlled hormetic kind. If you've heard of hormesis, that's a good thing. Like exercise is a hormetic stressor. When AMPK is active, your cells go into repair and cleanup mode. They digest old damaged proteins, reduce inflammation, and protect themselves from the damage that drives aging. The third pathway is mTOR. mTOR is the growth pathway activated by amino acids, carbohydrates, insulin, and IGF-1. When mTOR is high, you build. So things like muscle protein synthesis happens, cells divide, and tissue grows. For longevity, the simple version of the research is that you want sirtuins and AMPK active and mTOR low. But this is one of those situations where an oversimplified version of the research is not an accurate representation of how this plays out with humans in the real world. Because if you stop there thinking that you want to keep mTOR low all the time, you walk away thinking that the path to a long life is permanently low protein, calorie restriction, and never lifting anything heavy. And that's not actually what the evidence says. These pathways exist on a gradient spectrum. They flip on and off across a single day and on and off across a year. The longest lived populations that we have data on tend to spend significant time in low mTOR states without ever fully suppressing the pathway, because complete suppression brings its own costs in terms of muscle mass, recovery, and resilience as you age, because we don't want to be short on muscle either. A lot of fitness-oriented people are already doing this in spurts. You wake up after a fasted overnight period, which means AMPK has been running and your sirtuins have had enough room to work. You eat a high-protein breakfast and mTOR turns on for a few hours. You go to the gym, you train hard, and the act of training, even though you've eaten, will locally activate AMPK in those working muscles while also activating sirtuins and raising those NAD levels. You eat post-training and your mTOR is going to start to climb back up. As you go about your day, hit your steps, and walking will quietly nudge some of this AMPK throughout the afternoon or any other types of energy expenditure or mild physical activity. And the same pattern plays out across a year on a longer timeline. You spend some months in a deficit where AMPK is probably going to dominate. You'll spend some months at maintenance, and maybe you spend a little bit of time in more of a muscle building phase where mTOR is elevated more often. Since 2019, my team and I have specifically produced this show for listeners like you, people who care about health and who want to make a difference in the world, whether it's just for their own health and their family, or if you're actively working with others in their transformation. Producing this show has been something that my team and I have done and continue to put out best-in-class content specifically for you. If it's been enjoyable, entertaining, or helped you pass the time as you do chores, travel, or navigate daily life, the greatest compliment that you could give my team is a 5-star rating and review and sharing the show with someone else who's like-minded. Bringing those people back to the content and community is the greatest way that we can continue to share this work with the world. Unlike a lot of shows, you're not getting these product and supplement advertisements every 5 minutes, and we take the best-in-class research and data and bring it directly to you based on my clinical coaching experience and things that actually apply to the real world in digestible ways that make sense. And we translate these complex concepts so that they are immediately actionable and things you can put into practice in your daily life. If you enjoy the show, please consider sharing it or leaving a 5-star rating and review. My team and I appreciate it. Let's jump back into today's show. What the research tends to point to is the rhythm across these pathways. The body responds better to alternating periods of growth and repair than it does to chronic activation of one mode in either direction, where it's just chronic activation or chronic restriction. The people who get this wrong on one side are maybe bodybuilders who push mTOR to the ceiling year-round with massive food intake, exogenous hormones for over a decade, including things like insulin pushing that pathway. We have data showing that that doesn't do us many favors in terms of longevity. The people who get it wrong on the other side are the longevity purists because they eat so little protein for so long, they restrict calories, they're sarcopenic at 65, so they end up falling, breaking a hip, and they don't recover. This is certainly a possibility. I'm just giving you an example of how this might play out if you're chronically restricting food. The translation to transformation here is a fitness-oriented person who lifts, eats adequate protein, periodizes their nutrition across the years or many years, and gets meaningful low nutrient windows from sleep, walking, occasional fasting, or maybe lower calorie periods, is probably capturing about 90% of the available longevity benefit without giving up muscle strength and quality of life that make those extra years worth having in the first place. So let's talk about how to actually measure aging. You can measure this, and most people don't realize that. There's a difference between your chronological age and your biological age. Your chronological age is what you see on your driver's license, or you could base it off your birth certificate. Your biological age is what your physiology is actually behaving like as a result of your lifestyle, nutrition, training, exercise history over the course of your entire life. The two main ways to measure biological age right now are telomere length and DNA methylation clocks. The most well-known methylation clock is known as Grimm age, with pheno age and a few others that are in the same category. Telomeres are caps on the ends of your chromosomes that shorten over time, and once they get critically short, the cell senesces. Methylation clocks measure the epigenetic patterns that we talked about a little bit earlier in the episode. The current data suggests that methylation clocks are a stronger predictor of disease and mortality than telomere length. They're measuring different things, and ideally you'd track both. But if you only have the resources for one, Grimm age or a comparable methylation clock is probably the better bet. What's powerful about these tests is they give you some type of feedback loop. You can basically adjust your lifestyle, retest in a year, and see whether the changes you've made are moving that biological age in the right direction. Objective data combined with what you actually feel in your day-to-day life, your energy, your sleep, and recovery is more useful than just having one of these in isolation. Now it's time to talk about actual strategies and interventions, and none of this should surprise you if you've been listening to the show for a while. The longevity playbook and the metabolic health playbook overlap more than I think most supplement industry professionals and even a lot of health professionals would prefer for you to know. So the first step is going to be nutrition. A modified, higher protein, sort of Mediterranean style diet seems to support this really well, with monounsaturated fats, getting your fiber in, adequate protein, antioxidants, and polyphenols as the foundation. The next tool is fasting, and this is where you give AMPK and the Sirtuins room to work. Whether that looks like daily time-restricted eating, occasional 24-hour fasts, or maybe you do longer fasts a couple times a year, the key principle is just creating low nutrient windows or low nutrient availability windows where it's not so much the specific protocol as much it is the consistency of creating them over the course of your lifetime. Exercise is also important here because exercise and high-intensity training and resistance training, this is going to push these pathways the most, but even walking to some extent can activate AMPK, and lifting activates Sirtuins while also protecting you against the sarcopenia that erodes most people's independence as they age. While supplementation can often be overhyped, there's a few supplements that have legitimate research behind them related to aging. Resveratrol is a direct sirtuin activator. NMN and NR are precursors to NAD, which fuels the sirtuins. Most of the strong human data is still emerging on these, and we're still figuring out optimal dosing. The animal data is a lot more robust than the human data right now on a lot of anti-aging supplements, and the mechanism is understood, but we're still kind of exploring that safety profile if people are going to be taking this for decades upon decades to try to improve their health. Now, sleep, stress, and community belong in the same conversations and probably do more of the work than supplements. Chronic stress activates mTOR through cortisol pathways. Poor sleep impairs every recovery process, and social isolation has been associated with measurable epigenetic aging in observational data. If you've been tracking your sleep, your hunger, recovery, energy, digestion, and stress, those biofeedback signals that I talk about a lot, what you're reading are the same exact signals that determine how fast or how slow you're aging. The biofeedback that you're using, whether it's for yourself or to coach a client through a fat loss phase, and the markers driving how that client ages over the next 20 years are deeply connected at a physiological level. I started this episode by telling you about why this was important to me. Even though aging is going to happen to everyone, the point of this isn't necessarily to live forever. The point is to compress the period at the end of your life where you can't do the things that you love so that you can actually stay strong enough and sharp enough to be present with the people that you care about for as long as possible so that you have another day together. The interventions that we've talked about in today's show, so whether it's the rhythm of feeding and fasting and calorie restriction, the training or sleep, and even relationships. These aren't really anti-aging hacks, but they're things that your body actually responds to when you apply them with consistency over a long period of time. You don't need a $60 billion industry to tell you that. What you need are the levers that we've talked about today: nutrition, a little bit of supplementation, but a lot of this is going to be lifestyle, exercise, and pouring those into your life with consistency over a long time. If you're a coach listening to this, I want you to think about the fact that some of your clients may not be asking you about longevity directly, and maybe they're younger in their 20s and 30s and they're not thinking about that. But every conversation you have with them about sleep, stress, protein intake, and training is shaping how their body ages over the next 20 years. So whether you realize it or not, you're actually doing some type of longevity coaching every time you interact with a client. Or for you, if you are listening to this and planning out your exercise and nutrition, you are including an anti-aging regimen as part of your protocol. If this episode was useful, share it with someone who's been getting their longevity advice from the wrong places. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, leaving a review actually moves the needle on getting this kind of content to more people who need it. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe and stick around. I go through a lot of these different topics in my other episodes as well. So by making sure you're subscribed and hitting that notification bell, you'll never miss a show. If you're a health and fitness professional who's ready to take this kind of thinking and apply it to actual client cases, the kind of work that separates someone from being just a macro coach to actually being more of an advanced nutrition professional, that's the type of work we do inside FNMS. And there's links in the show notes to learn more. I appreciate you guys tuning in today, and I'll talk to you in the next show.